Another episode of SoCal Vibes here in sunny, not so sunny today, Southern California, Oceanside, few blocks off of the beach with Kirsten Trammell. I don't know, was it this last week?
I think so.
Yeah,
like
you were in here.
A week or two ago, yeah.
And we were catching up after a podcast, and we were talking about stories. And when my mind gets wrapped around a thought or a topic, you may know me well enough to know that it follows me around for about a week until I work it out. And I typically work it out on a podcast, actually.
Perfect.
The way that you were describing the process of storytelling, the way that you were talking about it got you very excited. And you disclosed some elements of storytelling that I hadn't really thought about before. I always thought that storytelling was, in the ways that I've experienced it, really great joke tellers. Like my grandfather was a great storyteller. He knew when to pause. He knew the right contextual moment, who his audience was, how liquored up they were. You know, he took into all the elements.
Yeah.
And really enjoyed the process. And you know how old people are. They tell the same stories over and over and over again. I think with practice, it gets better. But there's an art to it. And I don't know that he studied that, you know? And so I started to really ground all of this information up that you had shared in very brief as to how this applies to our daily lives, or the stuff we let in, the books we like, the movies we watch, the people we're attracted to and their stories, the organizations, the companies we work for. That's where my head went. And so I wanted to get in the mix a little bit with you about, you know, stories.
All of it. Well, even what you just said about your grandfather, like you're saying that he didn't study the art form, yet he probably told those stories time and time again. And whether he was aware of it or not, he learned how to tweak the story to get the best laugh. Or if he told it in a certain way one time, or with a different type of ending, or exaggerating one aspect of the story, he consciously or not recognized that people liked that more. If he's telling the same, he's adapting
his story to his audience sometimes,
yes.
Which I would watch happen.
And I think that like modern day storytellers, probably the best example of them are comedians, like stand-up comedians. For sure. Those are the people that are out there physically telling a story over and over again. I mean, sure, you have people that read books and they go on book tours. Like I love David Sedaris, and he goes on book tours and reads. But that's not a very common thing anymore. So comedians that do stand-up are probably our modern day storytellers.
I agree. And modern day in the flesh storytellers, if you will, yeah. And then the writers are also storytellers. Producers are their own story, or script writers, authors, all storytellers in their own capacity, methods, mediums.
This is correct.
Man, there's so many stories out there to be told.
Oh God, everybody has a story. And I think a lot of people don't think that they do, but there's one inside of everybody.
For sure.
So
delivery is key.
Yeah. And I think that there's, like, we're talking about the mediums, right? You're saying like screenwriters or authors or producers, directors. It's, if you look at it and how we learn, this is how I like to think about it. It's people are visual learners, audible learners, tactile learners, you know, so whichever medium you usually gravitate towards is probably how you learn the best.
Yeah. I don't read well, so
yeah,
I don't go directly to that medium for any information. Well, not any, but, you know, I have to occupationally, and I still tell a story in that. Even when I think it's everything we do, we're telling stories, presentations.
Yeah.
What happened in our day at the end of the day when we're sharing it with our loved ones. When you're catching up with mom and dad for the first time in a few months, we're storytellers.
Yeah. And I know I sent you that article, but
You wrote that article, didn't you?
I just,
It's very good.
well, but I found it fascinating because the article's about the benefits of storytelling. And I think that today, especially right now, communication is so important, and people that are really good at telling powerful stories are proven to be healthier and happier and have better relationships with people and have better careers. And it's all because you can connect with people better through being able to tell stories.
Yeah. It goes back so far too. That point I think that you just made goes back so far. The joy that comes of the entertainment behind storytelling, sort of like the comedians, if you will, of the modern day. But back when you'd have a town circle or square where you would go and watch people in physical bouts opened up by a storyteller. You know, big events were opened up by storytellers.
You're talking about like gladiator style? Okay.
Marriages, weddings now, you have a best man speech. It's always a story. You know, events is what I'm saying. From the beginning of time and history, storytelling has been a way to captivate, a way to entertain. And through both the storyteller and the audience's perspective, it puts a smile on our face, which changes the chemical reactions in our mind immediately. The gift of storytelling is like, to listen to a great story really lightens it, like makes people glow.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And I couldn't agree more. There's got to be some health benefits, but I never thought about it until I read the article that you wrote.
Yeah. And I think that if you're telling a story of your own, you're learning about yourself along the way too, right? Like, where do you fit into this story? Who are you in what you're telling? All of those sorts of things really teach you a lot. And then also how you communicate with people. I think there's so much to be learned about yourself and others through that. Like, let's say that you're sitting at home and you're telling a story to your girlfriend and she doesn't find it entertaining. You're probably going to be like, well, maybe that's
probably
not...
like 80% of the time.
You're like, well, maybe that's not the sort of story that she's interested in. And then you kind of start to adapt along the way to figure out what it is that what within yourself you can share with certain people to give them whatever it is that they may need.
But you've also got to, or the way I think about that is it does something for you too. It does something for us to tell the story. I think you mentioned that in your article as well, is that to put yourself out there and to tell stories improves your happiness, if that's measurable. But I think it's so fun to entertain.
Yeah.
Through a story. It's like the best.
Yeah. And I think it's not even just personal stuff. I mean, if you look at, there's been so much adaptation in marketing, which we don't necessarily have to dive into that, but how people and brands use stories to sell things now today. Everything is like, you can't just have a coffee company. You got to have a coffee company with a rad story behind it, you know, whether it be where the beans are grown and there's this elaborate process, or it's an emotional. It's really all about selling emotion.
Totally. If you look at COBO Bottle, we've done it that way. I mean, we tag the bottle with an emotion. Live, give, and heal is our motto.
Yeah.
You know, and then we have all these philanthropic efforts behind it. If you don't tell that story, you're missing. You're missing out on an opportunity to sell more product or help more people, for example, or reduce single-use plastics, for example.
Totally. And
you got to tell the story, I think.
And I think that the reason why that works so well is because it connects people.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Stories are connecting people.
100%.
When I think about storytelling, there's a few people in history. There's many people in history, whether it be, like I had mentioned, my grandfather, old grandpappy. Then there's the storytellers, the great storytellers of time, for example. And I'm going to cross over mediums, if you will, because it's all the same to me. A story is a story. whether it's a character's story or the story of life or a story of a group of people or a company or a brand. But if I think about the major stories that stick out in history for me, I think about all of the stories of biblical teachings. Like the Bible is by far maybe one of the oldest, most well-known, big-ass stories that we all can understand.
It's like the number one selling book in the world.
Right. And the stories in there are amazing. There's destruction, there's love, there's follies, there's hatred, there's malicious acts of humans against humans and nature and animal and all of these things. It's a beautiful story. Then you have the Mark Twains of the world with Huckleberry, the classics of love and war and all of these crazy, crazy things.
So you're asking, are they all telling the same story?
I'm curious. Yeah, is it all the same story that we're telling, or is it? It's not the same story, I mean, but they're all equally as entertaining. Is there a consistency behind stories among all mediums and among all shapes and forms that draws us more, maybe not so much to the characters themselves or the overall story, but I can be equally as drawn to a drama as I can to a comedy. It just kind of depends on my mood, but I'm equally as drawn to the story, but they're yet so different.
Well,
it's interesting to me.
So you're asking, is every story kind of the same?
Yeah. Do they have a same structure? Why is it that, what is it?
Well, so yes. Yes and no, I think would be the right answer. If you look at it in a couple of different ways, every story has a couple of things in common, no matter if it's a drama, a romance, a horror film, right? There's always an intention or a want, either kind of interchangeable, like an intention of the story or a want of a character. And then there's some kind of obstacles to reach that.
An intention or a want by the characters in the story.
Yes.
And then
there are obstacles.
Okay.
Right?
That makes a ton of sense already. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of it, when you start to break it down, it becomes really simple. So, but what differentiates good stories and bad stories is how connecting and powerful the want is, right? So I honestly am not, I haven't read the Bible, but if you look at a lot of stories, like pick a movie.
Fight Club.
Okay.
Pick a different movie.
Pick
that one's complicated.
Movie.
So pick a movie. Okay. The Godfather.
Okay, yeah. So what is the main character's want in that movie?
Power.
Okay, and then
control.
And then how?
I don't know. Like a lot.
How are they? There's all of these obstacles.
Yeah.
To get that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's basically.
I see why you didn't want me to pick.
Yeah.
Fight Club. Okay, that's a hard one.
Yeah, but that's okay. That's a very straightforward. The main character wants power. There's all of these obstacles in his way to get it, and you have a vested interest in this character. Right from the beginning, pretty much.
Yeah.
Right. And so any story is basically built around having those two things in it right away. And there's different ways that you could unfold that. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that, so looking at those two things, and then if you combine the fact that you're talking about how there's all of these stories all over the world, there's so many different themes, but they all kind of come back to, the basic emotions that we have in our lives, like fear, sadness, anger, love. They all kind of stem from that, but there's all of these different themes and I guess character arcs, right? So a character going from being weak to being strong, a character going from not speaking their truth to standing in front of people and having confidence and telling their truth, right? There's all of these different themes that you can think about that live in stories.
So you want to tug on the strings of people that you know is innate in them, which are wants. We want to achieve something, or we want something, or we're feeling something. And everyone has these emotions. And you're saying to find a way to tug on that a little bit in people, and then present obstacles in the journey to find a successful point in that achievement, and the follies and the grandiose moments that come in between is that roller coaster, that emotional roller coaster that we've all been through. And the more, I guess, volatile that journey is, the more exciting it is for us.
100%. This is the thing where I think it gets really fascinating, is that you can take a really mundane want, and if you make the stakes high enough and the character's desire high enough, you can enroll anybody into that. Like if you take Seinfeld, for example, or if you even look at Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, it's one of my favorites. Their want is to get weed, right? But yet they've created this story, and these two guys go on this huge journey that the audience is immediately like rooting for them, even though the want is not really in comparison to The Godfather, I guess you could say, right?
No, but it's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same story. Wow. And I was about to ask you to give me an example of like something that's mundane that would be a want that you could make so like entertaining. And that was pretty much it. They just wanted weed.
Yeah, there are a lot of comedy, and not all comedy, but a lot of comedy does do that, where they take something mundane and make it, and that's part of what makes it funny. I think is these like fixations on these small things, but you root for them to achieve them.
I think there's a piece of the production, if you will, and entertainment side that there's ridiculousness involved. Like your first thought is, oh my God, I can't believe they just did that. There's some element of just, that's bizarre and ridiculous. But yet what's bizarre and ridiculous, I think, comes back to what you were talking about. It's tugging on an emotion that we have that we can connect with, regardless of, because the reaction is the same, whether it's power, money, watching the aftermath of a car accident while you're driving down the road and you don't know the story, but you're wondering what the story is. It's that wonder of what happened or if everyone is okay, that you're developing the story in your mind and all the scenarios that it could be, and that gets you riled up. That's why we've got rubberneckers, right? Tying up traffic on the freeway, coming up with stories.
I had always heard this is totally not, but I had always heard that the traffic was actually not caused by the accident. It was caused by people slowing down to look.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. We all want to see.
And we all want to know what happened. What's the story?
Curious
We're creating
creatures.
our own with every little bit of information that we saw there. We're like, oh yeah, that's must have been. You ever been in the car and they're like, oh, this is what happened. And you come to find out in the news, it's like nothing like that.
Yeah.
Or you had your own story in your head.
Oh well, yeah.
Guilty.
We do that all day long.
Yeah.
But
and so when we get into the different kinds, the different types of stories, as an example in your life, what was a story that was so significant that it may have changed you for who you were? Because I have stories of my own, or in my mind, that I experienced with other people that changed, like a real experience, not one I read about, not one I saw on TV, but watching an experience or a story, kind of a moment in time unfold. That was really pivotal for me, and it changed my perspective in life. But I see it as a story.
Because it is.
It's like that piece replays in my mind whenever I need a reminder, but it plays out like a story, not like, I don't know, it's all a story.
Not like a memory. I think that they're one and the same.
I agree.
Yeah.
Stories we remember better whenever there's a flow to it.
Yes.
If you can create a story with the information that's before you, you will remember it rather than just trying to consume it. That's what I've learned with dyslexia, is that whenever I do read, in order to get into it, I can't see it as the letters and the words. I have to try to develop a story, whether that's the story they're telling or not. I have to relate that to a story in order for me to comprehend what I'm trying to read, if that makes sense.
Totally. I will never forget when I was in high school, I had this history teacher, and she would literally get up in class and tell history lessons as though she was telling a story. And it was the easiest way to remember things. Like I could just see it clearly in my mind. She was a phenomenal teacher, and I feel like I had never forgot her because of that. I guess that's a story in and of itself. But I also think too, like when it comes to acting, a lot of the times, like when I'll read a script, and in order to memorize the lines, it's so much easier for me to memorize them if I can actually picture what I'm saying, or like picture the events unfolding that this character is describing. Like, so if you can daydream in your mind what's happening and like watch that story unfold, then I think it's easier to remember it.
I agree. The daydreaming part. I used to do that in class a lot. I would try to absorb the information and then sort of daydream about whatever the heck it was they were talking about. And it would help me connect to the topic.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of visualizing or creating a story in your mind about it. Is that kind of the same? Is what you're referring to?
Yeah, definitely. I think so.
It's so interesting. So are we basically saying that everything, when absorbed as a story or told as a story, which actually is what's technically happening, and we're just using this grandiose word story, and I just really didn't understand it. It's just our story or your story or the story of life or the story of this, how we got here. This is all essentially a journey, which is also our story, all of ours. It's kind of creeping me out a little.
Just one giant experience. And then we communicate it in different ways.
So you've got a story. What is your story? Is it like some drama, or is it some super cheesy comedy? Yeah, what's your story? Are you a drama? Are you a romance?
I hope not. I hope I'm not a drama. As I was saying right before we started recording, that sometimes I feel like my life, I like to think that there are moments in my life where it's okay. Do you know what I'm talking about when there's the montage in the movie and the music's playing and the character is like figuring their shit out and they're like going to the gym and like building up their career and like all of these things are happening and there's like lovey, happy, toony music playing in the background? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that. I think I can't think of a film that's a good example, but I do know what you're referring to.
Basically any rom-com. So I like to hope that that's the portion of my life that I'm living in at all times.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really funny. I think that's a comedy.
I would hope so.
That's definitely a dry humor comedy. Am I right there?
Probably. That would be the goal.
That would be the goal. I feel like that's your MO.
Yeah, I don't want to live in a drama.
No.
Not about that.
No. Man, if I were to really think about it, I think I do live in a drama.
Well, I think this is the thing that I realized about comedy in a lot of ways, is that it is drama, but it's just how you choose to look at it. Like if you think about even a lot of people that write comedy or that like movies that are comedies, they're rooted in real life events, and it's just how you choose to look at them. Like like Judd Apatow is do you know who he is? He is the creator of like 40-Year-Old Virgin and Knocked Up, and basically any established, I mean, they're technically rom-coms, but they're really like comedies or whatever, movies as of like the last 10 years. But they like 40-Year-Old Virgin. I mean, that's a movie about a guy who's 40 and has never had sex.
Is that funny or something? No,
like,
it's super funny.
It kind of sounds sad.
Yeah, I've
right?
actually seen it, but it's also a drama / they made it funny.
Yeah.
He could have been a total downer about it and hard on himself, like there are people out there.
That could have been such a depressing movie.
Exactly. But however, at the same time, you're absolutely right. It could have been a depressing movie. At the same time, there's probably people out there depressed because they're 40 and haven't gotten laid yet that saw that and they're like, it's okay. I just need a bike and I need to start riding to the bars and acting as cool as I possibly can. And somebody's going to think I'm a geek that needs to get laid. And it's going to work out for me. You know, like maybe that's the one light at the end of the tunnel. That's what stories do for me. They give me a chance. Come on, give me a chance, you know?
Well, that's good, because I think sometimes people go into books or movies or podcasts or whatever to escape their reality and live somewhere else in a different world. And in some ways, I think that that's like really beautiful, because you can experience different lives by stepping into these mediums. But at the same time, I hope that, like you're saying, that these stories would inspire people in their life.
Right. That's the way I see it. But what you just talked about with connection and to stories to escape, I think that the people that I know and talk to and talk about what they're reading, I find that that's more common in the people that I know, because, or maybe that's just my understanding or perception of it, because I don't find myself doing that as much, which I'm thinking a little harder about now for the first time. I find that very interesting. For folks to escape in other people's stories or to experience other people's stories as an example of what's possible, which is almost 100% of the time the perspective that I take away from watching a movie, discussing something with someone, going to a comedy show, which we don't do much anymore. But seeing things, you know, that are a storyline, I'm like, oh, you know what? That's cool. I could, you know, that's a really cool story, and use that as a building block for mine. I don't think I've escaped in someone else's story in a long time. Is that how you experience stories, do you think, the majority of the time, or does it depend on the story?
I think it depends. And also, for me personally, like, what place am I in? Like sometimes... Yeah, I think it depends. I've never really actually thought about that. I think when I read books, I like leave myself and I like enter this different world. But when I watch a movie, maybe because I struggle to watch something without doing other things, I'm like more present in myself.
Yeah.
But I also, now I watch, and now when I'm like watching and reading, I'm doing it more from a place of learning as opposed to experiencing.
That's what I'm saying right now about the way that I experience stories these days.
Yeah. I'm saying that I'll watch a film and think to myself, wow, they just shot that scene from 7 different angles. That must have taken them 8 hours to do. And those actors must have read the same lines over and over again. Like, those are the things that I'm thinking in my mind at this point, as opposed to what's really unfolding in the story in the film.
And that's movies.
Yeah.
But what about book reading?
Just the same thing, like,
as a writer and an actor, you're seeing the same thing in books now rather than being part of the story. Like the one thing I come back to and thought of whenever you said that is the never ending story, how this boy goes up into the stormy attic and he sits down with this storybook and he's reading the storybook and he becomes the character in the story, you know? And I don't remember feeling that way, but when I talk to people that read science fiction and they read fiction, like bizarre stuff, they become part of that storyline so much so that it kind of influences the way that they perceive and behave sometimes. They become, between chapters when they've got to put the book down, they come back to conversations with a whole new kind of perception of the situation.
But that's when, for me,
creepy.
that's when you know that you've found something good.
Yeah.
When you can completely lose yourself in the story that you're reading or in the book, whatever,
Yeah. Another great example, I was dating this young gal. I was young as well in Portland, and Sex and the City was a big thing at the time. And so she was watching Sex and the City all the time, and I would come over and catch an episode or two here and there when we would hang. And she was behaving like them. She became part of the story. She was eating takeout Chinese and having, what I mean? Like, she became part of that, one of the characters of the story almost.
Interesting. One of the things that I find fascinating about that show is, I know we kind of talked about clusters of characters within something. And that show is a perfect example of, there's those 4 women, right? One of them is all about sex. She's like the libido. One of them is the brains. One of them is the heart. And then Carrie is all 3 of those put together.
Oh, wow.
And she is oftentimes the most relatable. Like, everyone feels like there's a part of Carrie in them, And then her 3 friends are like really embody just one aspect of what it is to be a woman. And we all know those
folks.
And it's interesting because when you look at how the stories unfold, that
so cool.
That a lot of the times that happens because the more conflict that you have, or the more opposition or juxtaposition that lives within in a story or in a film, whatever, the more relatable it is, or you see people more powerfully, right? So if you looked, I forget what their names are, and that I never really watched the show that committedly for Sex in the City, but what was the Samantha, I think, is the one.
Samantha's the tall blonde.
Yes.
I met her in Greenwich, Connecticut on a patio restaurant once whenever I was up there in New York.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. She was the one that was all about sex.
Yeah.
She was the libido.
Yep.
Yeah. And so when you contrast that against the redhead who was the lawyer and the brains, then you really see the difference between those characters. And that's what makes that show intriguing, not just one of the aspects of it.
The sex part is what, is the basic stem, where they're all just living this New York wild life, which is so typical of the Epicurus sort of lifestyle that you can live at that age in New York, but it also shows the obstacle side of it.
Yeah.
Following your main emotion of sex, love, logic, and showing the follies that unfold and the challenges or obstacles, as you mentioned in the stories before, that unfold ahead of you when you behave that way.
Exactly. And then because each of them has this powerful essence that they embody, they're going to experience things in different ways, which is what creates more layers within the show.
Not only layers, but more connection with how people can relate.
Yeah. And it's funny because, even that show, they have all of these, like on BuzzFeed, there's those quizzes, like, which character are you? The girls were just like totally obsessed with figuring out, like, oh, I'm the Samantha of the group, or oh, I'm the character, like that becomes
I didn't
a thing.
know about that, but yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. And
which character would you be?
Probably Carrie.
Which was?
She was the writer. She's like the one that's like all of them, all of the parts put together.
Yeah. Okay. She was like the main character. Mm-hmm. That's right. Blondie with all the shoes.
Yeah. I don't really have that many shoes though.
But I get it. I understand from a persona perspective.
Yeah. And there's a lot of films and books and things that use that same structure. Same thing for Mean Girls. I know I told you about Gilligan's Island. Same thing there.
Oh yeah, you have a pretty big cast that is very unique and very different personalities. You're so right. Mm-hmm.
If you had a cast that was 5 of the people that were the exact same, there would be no conflict. It would just be a room full of yourself, you know, and there's nothing really to build off of from there.
Right. Well, that wouldn't work for me because I have like 17 personalities. So no, I'm just kidding. Which Logan are you going to get today?
Okay, but I guess think about it like this. Let's say that you're having a conversation with someone who believes exactly the same things as you.
Not fun.
No.
For more than like 30 seconds.
Right. You're like, oh, cool. We're similar. Now I'm bored. And it's natural too, because I think that people are drawn to people that are opposite from them in a lot of ways. You know, you kind of everyone kind of steps into their certain roles in life normally.
They do. That's weird. It's by design. Mm-hmm. In my little brain. Right? You've stepped into your role, Kirsten. Mm-hmm. You've taken your place. That's the way I see it. What you just said, you know? I know that's not exactly how you mean it, but it kind of is. Mm-hmm. We all are in this story. You've taken your place. We know our role.
We know you know what character you are.
I don't like this. I don't know that I like
this.
that.
Oh, this is beautiful. So you can change. And I think that
God, listen to this. I love this. Yes. She was like, this is the deal though. You can change. And I'm like, oh, she's going to start levitating out of the chair. I'm so sorry.
As a character, there's always a character arc, right? Not always, but oftentimes there is. Either there's a character goes from a low place to a high place, or self-destructing and it goes from high to low. Like you can look at Romeo and Juliet. In that story, the story starts out with these 2 people in love and it ends with them dying, right? Yeah. Or you can look at it like...
Well, it ends with the release of their commitment to each other. Their bodies die. Their love does not. It's all about, that's what I took away from the story, is they didn't die at all. The love lived on, and the story lived on to tell that it's okay. That's the story. It's okay to love and lust to a level where death is the imminent, most critical, what are you willing to give up for what you believe in? We talked about this the other day. That's the storyline I get from that.
Okay, I didn't pick that up.
No?
I think that the story ended and you continued it onward. No. I mean, I guess, sure, you can look at it that way.
Yeah. Creepy, but yeah.
But yeah, so you can have a character arc. You can change who you are. You don't have to be the antagonist forever. You know, you don't always, like the villain doesn't always have to be the villain. They can be saved, or they can remain a villain and die. Yeah. Up to the creator's choice.
Damn.
But I think that that's part of it too. It's that people love watching change and growth, right? You don't pick up a book to read about someone just living a menial life and doing nothing and wanting nothing and changing nothing about themselves. You dive into that because you want to become a part of something that's evolving. Well, and that's kind of the thing that it reminds me of the thing I was telling you about the South Park, how they tell stories, right? So if you were to talk about your day and be like, I woke up and then I went to work and then I ate lunch and then I watched a movie and then I brushed my teeth and then I went to bed. That's not a story. That's like a checklist, right? So there's like the theory that, or not the theory, but it's a structure that a story can only exist, and this is what South Park creators say, if it has the words, something happens, and then it's followed with but or therefore, right? So I woke up, but it was pouring rain outside. Therefore, I couldn't go to work. And as a result, like, and then a story unfolds. I don't know what the exact examples, like, you know, in that instance, but when it comes to creating a story or telling someone a narrative, if you say and then we all know people that do that, right? And you're sitting there being like, where is this going? Like, what is the point of this? Mm-hmm. Right? And so that's what differentiates something that's changing and evolving versus a shit story.
Knowing how to tell a story, my story, it's a practice for sure. Mm-hmm. And I think that some people are innately good at it. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly what makes people innately good at storytelling, but I firmly believe that it's practice and exposure. One of the best storytellers, I think, is Tarantino. Mm-hmm. His depth in character and his it's hilarious. There's comedy in it. There's very serious drama. There's gore. I mean, you hit every single peak and valley of emotional tugging in a Tarantino film.
Yeah.
And his character builds are brilliant.
A lot of his stories have what's called non-linear timelines, right? So events happen out of order in a lot of ways.
In reverse, he'll start his movie with the end.
Yeah, and so that puts a unique spin on the way that he creates.
Yeah.
I mean, other people do it. Probably like one of the most noticeable. Have you ever seen the movie Memento? That has non-linear timeline in it.
Is that a Tarantino one?
No, but it's a similar structure. Yeah. But I think that he does that, and it intrigues you. And immediately you want to know, how did we end up here? Right? And I think that sometimes it's like life. Like life doesn't happen in chronological order. Like it's not like that's not like one step forward, one step forward, one step forward. You jump around a lot.
Yeah, you do.
And so I think that there's like a connecting element that he uses through that structure. But
explain a little more of that if you will.
Well, the nonlinear
about
storytelling,
the nonlinear life story.
Not like we're time traveling, but I think that like in a journey, you take steps forward, and then you lose. You take a step forward and then you lose. It's kind of like a whirlwind. It's not just like a straight line up, you know?
I do.
That's how I relate to that.
Yeah. Those are the obstacles. Mm-hmm. The follies.
Yeah. And there's this, I don't know necessarily if Tarantino would use this style, but there's something that's called a hero's journey. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before.
I have.
You have? Okay. But that's a lot of stories written following that kind of plotting. Like Star Wars is probably like the most famous example of following the hero's journey.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like Lord of the Rings, all of those kind of giant true journeys, but the same plotting and the same story structure is used in a lot of different setups. It doesn't have to be actually like physically going on this journey into a different land or planet.
Sure. Well, Kill Bill is following a hero's journey, in my opinion, but that may be one of the few that I see that Tarantino's done that way. But there is a follow the hero's journey plot actually in Death Proof, one of my favorite Tarantino films.
I don't think I ever saw that one.
Basically the storyline is he wanted to make the best car chase movie. It's my favorite Tarantino film, and you'll understand a lot about why I like that movie when you watch it, I think. And I think it's absolutely brilliant, particularly on character build. He thinks about the details.
Oh, yeah.
In the connection piece, but he doesn't make a big deal or show out of it. I think that is what I find so great about storytelling when I see stand-up, whenever I watch a movie or whenever I hear someone explaining something that happened to them or him. It's one of those things where there's really powerful, pivotal moments, and they sort of gloss, like they build up to that, and then the moment itself and their experience in that moment is kind of, you're like, wait a minute. Like, wait a minute, how come you guys aren't freaking out? I'm freaking out of here. Why is life still going on like normal? And there was like this crazy pivotal moment that just happened. That's what I'm feeling, but that's life.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting.
That's life. It could just continue. The story goes on.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't.
Are you saying that moment happens before like the big climax?
Every movie.
Okay, so that
every movie is like climax, and then we're like, okay, next scene is everybody's happy in the kitchen again, going to work at 8 every morning and taking the kids to school.
It is interesting when you understand that the climax of whatever the film or whatever it may be happens at the very end. I mean, the ending or the wrap up is really just a moment. And I think I kind of like that because it leaves you to wonder, now what? Right?
That's what I mean.
Yeah. And then you're left to continue creating, like living that world in your own imagination, which I think is kind of cool. Unless they come out with a sequel, then you got that.
Oh my God.
I think it's sometimes too, and maybe not just the ending, but when you're telling, whether it's in writing or show, like a film, you don't want to assume that your audience is dumb and you have to spoon feed them everything, because nobody likes to feel that way, right? So there's like different techniques that you can use in writing they call it show versus tell, You don't want to come out and straight out say, this is what I want and this is how I feel, and you want to show that and leave the mystery. And the same in film. It's more about what's unfolding as to what's being said in a lot of ways, which I think is one of my favorite parts of it. And then that leaves you as the audience up to interpret it however you choose.
Isn't that the story of life?
Mm-hmm.
Where the experience is happening,
mm-hmm.
and it's up to us to choose how we see it, perceive it. I mean,
mm-hmm.
The Three Stooges. It hurts to get poked in the eye by your buddy, and it sucks. It's not funny. When you fall off a ladder, you're gonna get hurt, right? Mm-hmm. When you're slipping around on some paint and you electrocute your buddy while he's working, you know what I mean? Like, nothing's funny about that whatsoever. People die from these things, but they made it hilarious. Like the downfall of others or the self-imposed conflict, just leave it at that. Mm-hmm. Danger, imminent danger, and conflict and feeling pain. They made it hysterical and funny. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. But that's their story. They're a bunch of klutzes. You know what I mean? They're just a bunch of klutzes. That's the way some people are.
Yeah.
And you got two ways to look at it. This sucks. Or, wow, what's next after this last folly? That's happened. Now that's out of the way. I say that whenever I get out and I'm on my first wave. You know how that is in a surf session, right? You either get a bitchin' first wave or you're standing on the top of it thinking, damn, if I had just given that 2 more paddles. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If I had just given a little more oomph and like sent it, this would have been, and everybody's looking at you like, geez, I gave that person that wave, you know? Mm-hmm. Nah, it's like, now that's out of the way, what's next? I'm going to use that learning, that story to build for my next story, which is I'm going to give it a couple extra paddles.
Mm-hmm. That's just made me think about, like there are people that exaggerate things, right? Like in surfing, like, oh, I caught like this.
They take you on a fishing
overhead
trip.
Yeah. Take you on a fishing trip.
A surf and yeah.
So the reason why I bring this up is because there's this thing called an unreliable narrator.
An unreliable narrator.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And they happen a lot in stories. There's a couple ways that these narrators present themselves. And it's kind of like that idea that your perception is your reality. But when it comes to experiencing a book or a story or a film or whatever have you, from the eyes of the narrator, from the voice of the narrator, if it's an unreliable one, how do you know what to trust? And it happens all the time. Like someone could be on drugs. Someone could be mentally ill. Someone could be a child. Like children are what I would consider unreliable narrators. You know, it's like a child tells a story and it's completely different than what's actually unfolding. So you as the audience are then up to figure out what's actually happening. And I think that happens quite often, and it adds another element to another layer, if you will.
I have to say what I'm thinking. The news, the media, unreliable narrators.
Great
Is that
example.
what you're referring to?
I wasn't necessarily thinking about the news, but
conceptually speaking,
a
yes. Real deal example of the largest, most unreliable narrator on earth, in my mind.
That's literally what they are, yeah.
Is the media and the news. But they are also the most compensated and brilliant storytellers of potentially our time.
Yeah. That's what they're doing. They're sitting up there telling you a story. Whether it's accurate or not is up to you to decipher.
Maybe this is why I don't read fiction. I just want to know the truth. Shoot me straight. Don't take me on a fishing trip. I find I find real life journeys and real life stories much more intriguing than I do fiction.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of the times when people create fiction, it's based in some form of a reality. I remember reading somewhere, that's a little bit different, but that when you dream, you don't make up people. Like you can't form the face of someone that isn't real in a dream. I kind of think that
unless
fiction...
it's aliens.
Oh.
But
you
how do we know
saw...
aliens aren't real?
But like the alien that you dream about is probably something
Oh
that you
my
see.
God, we're about to have that conversation. My God, here we go.
I think that fiction is created in a similar mindset. Like a lot of it is a fabrication or an exaggeration or an inspiration from reality.
Why do they call it fiction?
Because it didn't actually happen.
But it was a real, actual reality. How do we know it didn't actually happen? Maybe not in this lifetime.
Like what I'm saying is I could take...
Not in this version of life.
I'm saying that I could take you as a person that I know and set you into a story that you've never lived. And that would be fiction. What I'm saying is if I was like, I'm going to sit down and write a story today and it's not going to be real. And I decided that you and Dave here were going to go on an adventure out hiking the PCH trail.
Okay.
Like
Sounds
that
fun.
didn't actually happen, but I'm writing it as though it has. And I'm using you guys and that trail to create something that isn't real.
I understand now.
Yeah.
In a more linear understanding. I think maybe in my mind, I'm thinking like the story of some reality. You said it has happened in some reality. That's what I'm thinking about is that statement of what you said that got my mind moving.
Okay.
Do you see?
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was in relation to your dreams or in relation to a more formal way of storytelling and writing a book about a story of me and Dave taking a hike down the PCH trail. But whenever we're talking about the stories that we create in our unconscious and subconscious mind, which is I thought what you were kind of referring to, right? Is that maybe that storytelling or the exaggerator, the untrustworthy, not maybe untrustworthy, but what was the terminology? Unreliable. Storytelling, maybe that happened in some reality in their world, in their mind.
Exactly. And that's where you start to wonder.
And this is what's
real.
Okay, so that's what I'm getting at. Do you need to know what's real, or maybe it is real to them? Maybe it's very real to them. Maybe they actually had that experience and experienced it that way, even though you didn't witness it or see it. It's kind of like watching a scene in a movie and you didn't even see it, but someone else sitting next to you did.
Like The Sixth Sense.
Exactly.
Or Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Well, okay, yes.
Like that guy is having that experience. Sorry, I cut you off. That guy's having that experience, but is it really happening?
So the perception of the way we walk into a story or the way we come out of a story is completely different.
Yeah, and it's actually really interesting that you bring that up, because I think that that's where Tarantino's not continuous timeline methodology comes into play, because you're looking at the story from a different perspective. Wondering like for Kill Bill, how did that ending happen? So you're trying to find that while all these other things are unfolding.
I see what you mean. The story's way more fun when it's volatile. Way more fun when it's volatile and things are at risk.
Yeah, the higher you're making the stakes higher, which makes you more committed to it, and
making the stakes higher.
Yes.
And more committed to it. That's my life.
Oftentimes people have these outer wants, and I think that this is so common in life. We all have these outer desires that, whether we share them with people or with ourselves or not, but then there's also something that's like your inner want. And oftentimes it's really, this kind of fascinates me, is that a character could go through a journey and have this really giant outer want, but really deep inside they want something else. And like a perfect example of this is, have you ever seen the Rocky movie, like the first one, where he wants to win and he doesn't, but you're still satisfied because his inner want, which is basically to believe in himself again, is there. And I think that that is so much more important than having that trophy, like the external validation. So figuring out what your inner wants are through your journey, whether it's something that you're watching or in your own life. This is another thing that I find fascinating. And this is we didn't even talk about this aspect of storytelling, but it's people that give speeches. And I don't know if I was ever I talked about it a while ago, but the most famous speeches and the best public speakers, they use this formula. I don't know if they know it or not, but it's actually something that a woman studied in public speaking. But it's basically this idea that you take a topic and you show it in the present light. So probably the most well-known one is if you look at MLK's I Have a Dream speech, right? I don't know if I've talked about this with you before, but he takes the audience through this moment where he's like, this is where we are today. And this is why this is hard and it's painful, but this is where we could be. And then you shoot the audience up to this point of literally the dream of like, this is where we could go. And then you bring them back to the reality. And you do this yo-yo effect. And it really sends people on this emotional journey so that the farther along you get, the more committed you become to that dream, that future that you want to have, as opposed to the reality that you're living in today. And Steve Jobs would do this a lot as well when he would give speeches. And it's a really powerful way to pull people in. And when I get behind the scenes about some of this stuff, it's like so simple, yet you don't even know that it's happening to you as an audience, but it really is powerful.
It's the journey, the volatile journey speech. Mm-hmm. It works with everybody, even through email. It really does.
Yeah. These are all really simple methods of communication, whether you're writing a book or creating a film or sending someone an email or talking to someone at the grocery store. It's all synonymous, I think.
All picked up by experience of communicating with people. And some people are very, very aware of the communication flow and picking up on the variables as they're giving it. Like, that's not working with this person or this audience. Let me switch it up a little bit, get people to stand up, get them moving around, constantly watching for speakers. I mean, if you're losing the crowd, comedians, I bet, do the same. Change their act in the middle, or do they stick with it?
Oh, I don't know. I would imagine that they all have their own formulas.
Yeah.
Yeah. I talked about David Sedaris a little bit, but he does public He reads his stuff out loud, his essays, but he'll literally stand up there with a pencil and take notes. If people laugh, if people don't laugh, what's happening in the room when he says this sentence.
Really?
Yeah. And he'll tweak things based on the audience's feedback. So every single time he talks, he's changing things and getting better at it, just like your grandfather.
Yeah. So interesting. What makes those people that? Were they conditioned to be this way? Were they taught? Did they study? Did they become? It's like when people are say to me that people are conditioned to be what they are. You know, we are not ourselves. We are not who we see. We are all this the result, the product of our surroundings, our upbringing, and everything we've been exposed to. That thought. But really, when I come back to it, good storytellers maybe didn't come from a history of storytellers. Or did they? Is it an analytical mindset? Is it what makes people a good storyteller? In essence, training, practice? Yeah.
I think some people are naturally aware and they know just easily how to step into that place and spark people. But I think that I believe that you can learn anything if you really want to. But I think it's something that takes practice. I mean, there are a lot of people that step into writing and acting as second careers, or, you know, they don't make it until they're older, and things like that. So I think it's something that you definitely grow into, and as you get older as well, as part of it, like being less, I don't know what the word is, inhibited, like allowing yourself, because you were talking about like being vulnerable. Like in order to really truly tell a story, you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. And I think that that's something that doesn't easily come for a lot of people.
Either be vulnerable or be perceived as vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right? Because the perception of vulnerability, being perceived as being vulnerable, opens others up. Storytelling as a communication method, and if you get it right, can be very powerful and manipulative.
Yes.
I think that what we're talking about here is quite possibly one of the most powerful tools that we've got. I think is the essence of what makes humans humans, is to be able to produce a future outcome with the information that we have now. That's what makes us so smart. We can strategize predict what's in the future. We can design things that haven't happened yet, build for the future, right? Other colonies of animals and so on can do that on a pretty short-term basis. It's very relatively short-term. We do it unlike anything else. And to tell stories, which has been the history of how we know what we know, literally, history is that. I find, and part of the reason what's been stirred up in my head all week after we had the initial discussion is storytelling is one of the most powerful tools that humanity has seen. It's driven us into Christianity and Buddhism and family trees and history of our family, who we are. Those stories have become us. We have become it. And we are also doing it, living it, and telling it.
Yeah. And I think that the more you allow yourself to experience that, the easier it is to understand other people.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. All right. Well, thanks again, Kirsten. We'll wrap it up. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Logan.